Real stories from history that people don't know about? My favorite, at this moment, ask me again next week and I'll have another one, I'm sure, is King Sejong of Korea. Prior to his reign, Koreans used Chinese script to write, which did not work well. I mean, it worked, but Chinese and Korean are different languages. Chinese is like English, in that it is an analytic language. Our sentences are made up of different words, which are combined in certain ways, grammar, that help convey the meaning. Korean is what's known as an agglutinative language, meaning that it relies way more on morphology. As an example, in English we have ed, which we can put on the end of a word to change the tense. Well, Korean has things like that to convey tense, emotion, surprise, frustration, a host of other things. As someone who spent a year learning Korean, the depth of Korean morphology is rather daunting. But the point is, Korean does not fit well into Chinese, so learning to read and write in Chinese was extremely difficult. Which, I'm sure you can guess, meant only the wealthy could afford to do it. King Sejong thought this was bullshit and decided to invent an alphabet for his people. A phonetic alphabet. Now, personally, I doubt he did it himself. He probably hired some guys to do it, but regardless, it is because of him that this alphabet got invented. And he did it over the objections of high officials in his court, who literally complained that if the peasants could read and write, then they could become the equal of the upper class. And like the way the legal system worked, to make a complaint, you had to submit a written report, and most of the peasants couldn't write, so they would have to pay a scholar to write a report. And the scholars were upper class, so if the scholars didn't agree with a complaint, they could just choose not to write it, or write whatever they wanted, and the peasants would never know. So if the peasants could read and write, they would start submitting their own complaints. To which King Sejong was like, "No shit, Sherlock. That's the point. I want the peasants to be able to complain because I'm the king, and I want to help them. And it's easier to help them if I know what they want. I want them to be able to move up in society. It's bullshit that only the rich get to do that." I'm paraphrasing, of course. So he invents this alphabet, and it is amazing. Like seriously, if you want, you could teach yourself to read Hangul, the Korean alphabet, in an hour. Unless you're an idiot. Again, I'm going to paraphrase King Sejong. I wasn't just being a dick there. He said when he published the alphabet that it was designed to be learned by an average man in an hour and by an idiot in about a week. On top of this, and I have to tell you, I learned this listening to a podcast, and this next part actually made me tear up on the subway. King Sejong was a believer in Confucianism, which he saw as very logical. He thought of Buddhism as superstitious nonsense. But most of the people of Korea were Buddhist at the time. So in addition to just a textbook on how to read this new alphabet, among the first books he had published were Buddhist scriptures. Because even though he didn't believe, he knew that was what his people would want. He was totally right about the alphabet. Subsequent kings realized the power of it, and not being the awesome man that he was, tried to stamp it out. For a while, it was something only women used. This is a plot point in some historical Korean dramas and movies I've seen. But in the early 1900s, people started using it in earnest. And now Korea is one of the most educated countries in the world. If I could bring anyone back from the dead for 30 minutes, I think it would be him. I'd love him to just see a Korean library, or sit and watch a bunch of Koreans studying, to see the gift he gave his people.